All right, Gaza War Day 321. Hey John, you're a little dark.
Am I?
Yeah, a little. Do you have any more light? Yeah, that's a little more light. Yeah, that was a bit better. I don't know. It's a little. Yeah. Um. So we've got a very active front in the West Bank. We could just jump right in. Tulkarm, there was an IED. There was a big bombing in Tulkarm. I've seen the scenes of destruction in Tulkarm after the latest raid. Is the Israeli officials have been talking about how they want to turn the West Bank into Gaza. It seems like they are becoming more and more destructive in their raids.
Yeah, Nur Shams called themselves Little Gaza. I saw
Yeah.
the 14-hour raid again. It's something we've talked about a number of times. They just go in, smash some stuff, kill some people.
Burn houses sometimes, burn businesses. They did that a couple of days back in Nablus, I think.
Yeah, there's just generally not a lot of coverage of the West Bank. I guess, makes sense. There's a lot going on, but like a lot going on in the West Bank as well as outside of the West Bank.
Yeah, indeed. But
Tulkarm's been the center of things for a while.
yeah, and IEDs, big explosions from IEDs, and they're claiming to have killed Israeli soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, while the Israelis are claiming to have disabled IEDs, which probably means driving over them
And blowing up.
and blowing up.
I guess that's one way to do it. Um, Yemen, Ansar Allah. This was a couple of days of Ansar Allah. They were inactive for a little while, eh? And I thought it was because they were building up for their big attack, their response to Hodeidah, but maybe they were and they ended up postponing it again and going back to these kinds of operations. But they attacked a ship that maybe they may have sunk it. It's called the Sunion, Sounion, oil, carrying oil. And the I saw a photo of the crew on some kind of boat evacuated. So
Yeah,
the
they got
boat was,
evacuated by the NATO forces.
but the NATO forces were not there to prevent the sinking. And the way they described the sinking was a little different. I don't think it was one of their anti-ship ballistic missiles. It was like speedboats. They said speedboats, RPGs,
Oh, really? I didn't see
and
that part.
yeah, and then I think they rammed it in with they rammed the ship with a explosive laden speedboat.
Yeah, yeah.
So they said the fact that we were able to do this shows how there's not as much there's not as much Western Navy in the Red Sea as they are claiming.
And
You know,
there's not as many ships in the Red Sea anymore. Like the numbers are down by like 80%.
yes, yes, yes,
So there's
yes,
like the number
absolutely.
of targets are a lot lower.
Because it's working. It's because the blockade is working. So, and the other thing Ansar Allah said, I don't know whether it was Houthi himself or someone else, but they were saying that Eilat port, al Rashrash in Arabic, is basically bankrupt. But they said now we're going for Ashdod and we're basically reducing the economic activity at the Ashdod port. So
Yeah, the port of Eilat's been effectively shut down for
yeah,
many months.
yeah. He said Malik Houthi's speech. He said they've targeted 182 ships. They've carried out operations with 21 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and naval vessels this week. They mentioned most airlines have suspended flights. Delta, I saw an announcement that Delta suspended flights. Malik Houthi was very angry with the Arab regimes and Muslim regimes. He was like, even the Colombian president banned the export of coal while Arab regimes are sending fruit to the enemy. So it was one of those berating kind of speeches from Abdul Malik
I guess
al-Houthi.
he's pretty much the only one left doing that, right? Like Nasrallah doesn't seem to
He's
address
given
the
up.
Arab states. Yeah.
Yeah. He did. I remember some early on when he would say, like, you can't even do anything humanitarian. But I guess they can't do anything humanitarian anyway because Israel's closed everything. Did you hear that Egypt sort of said no to?
Yeah, Egypt's involved in some typical of Egypt sketchy negotiations about the Philadelphia corridor. A couple days ago, they said that they would allow Israel to. Well, back channel said that they would allow Israel to stay in the corridor for 6 months, and they're in these like really detailed negotiations with the Americans about like how many watchtowers the Israelis can have. Like the Israelis want 8 watchtower, like 8 fixed positions along the Philadelphia corridor, and the Americans are like, what about two and some electronic gear? It's just
Principled bargaining
principled
101.
bargaining. Because the Philadelphia corridor is a part of the Camp David
Camp
peace
David.
agreements, right? So it's like it's a written agreement about how that's supposed to operate. And there's a second agreement after the disengagement, Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2006. But yeah, uh, this it's a total catastrophe. The closing of that border is just such a disaster. Now 107 days.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think Netanyahu's plan is just like to make this the new status quo. Like we just have this be what Gaza is forever.
Yeah.
And and epidemics and polio and starvation and
Yeah, and the IDF is behind that. They make it seem like there's this big divide in Israel between Netanyahu and the army, but the it's the IDF that wants to stay in the corridors. It's the IDF that knows they didn't, quote unquote, finish the job. But
yeah,
yeah, Gallant, the defense minister, is saying he said uh, either today or yesterday that they have defeated the 4 battalions in Rafah, and now they're going to move to the north, which is just
yeah. It's
they just totally destroyed Rafah, right? Like in the other cities, they at least had a pretense of going door to like house to house to try to like find, tunnels and weapons or whatever. They at least had a pretense of that in some areas. In Rafah, they were just like, oh, everything's booby trapped.
we just have to bomb
We're just gonna
shell.
destroy it all. And it's just, I mean,
Have
the
you
only
fought?
limitation is the amount of explosives that
Right.
they have, right? Like it takes people say like, they erased Gaza, but like it takes a lot of munitions to drop entire cities like they are. And they're doing a pretty good job of it, but there's still
Yeah.
there's not enough TNT in the world in Israel to destroy the tunnels. The IDF admits that, and now they are talking in Rafah like that the operation is done. They're not
Winding.
going into the city of Rafah anymore. They're just
But
going to
like
focus on the corridor.
your point about munitions is really important because I don't know if people have fully grasped the fact that this is America against Gaza. It's like this is not Israel does not have the resources to do this. This
No,
is
not
not
even
an
close.
Yeah, this is not an Israel project. This is America. This is the resources of the entire continent of North America just going to starve and murder and bomb a tiny confined population. And it's like this is what this is what American civilization has. This is the culmination of American civilization.
Yeah, well, somehow framing it as if they were there was all these red lines,
Yeah.
but the structural operation and the logistics of it, there's just absolutely no way to do it without the US. And it's not just before, right? Like there's so many things in Israel that are just on hold essentially that need to
Yeah.
be at some point will need to be um like restocked, if you will, right?
Hmm.
So they're using more munitions than the normal trade amounts, which is why you see these, uh,
Yeah.
every couple weeks we see this $3 billion, 5 billion, 20 billion,
Yeah.
all these numbers, is because they have to restock their military.
At some point, and it wasn't that long. It was 3, 4 months or something. I did a sit rep about Egypt because I was reading about the 1973 war and the scale of the airlift. And everybody was talking about the unprecedented scale of the airlift, the American airlift to save Israel from Egypt. And this what the Americans have airlifted to Israel over the past 10 months for this genocide is way more than that
Yeah.
airlift. It's
Yeah.
it,
And they also, after that initial airlift, they said in 73, we can't do these airlifts. We need to have strategic reserves of these weapons inside Israel that they don't technically count as Israeli weapons. They count them as an American weapons cache. And that was to prevent the need for these airlifts. And still,
yeah, they've used all of that up and they're airlifting. And like I said, the airlift that they exceeded that epic 1973 airlift within a couple of months. It was within a couple of months. And now it's probably done 4 or 5 times that now.
yeah,
And and 4 or 5 times what the tonnage dropped on Hiroshima, right?
yeah, something like six times
Yeah.
Hiroshima. 55,000, like the IDF number is 55,000 heavy munition airdrop, like airstrikes,
Yeah.
like with 1,000, 2,000 pound bombs. Some to 250 and 500, but the vast majority, they've been dropping these heavy bombs. It's just unbelievable. And they've pushed the entire population of Gaza now into like 10, 11% of the territory, with 2 million people stuck in there.
And that's what they're trying to destroy now,
And then
right?
now
Deir
that's what
al-Balah
they're
area.
attacking,
Yeah.
even though they've got technically 89% of the Gaza Strip to attack without population centers. They're attacking the middle camps where people are, or Khan Yunis, where people went back to live in destroyed, to put tents on top of their destroyed houses.
So, um, you guys talked to Syed Mohammed Marandi. I caught your broadcast. I didn't catch all of Mirandi's, and I didn't catch when he was talking about the timing of the counterattack. Can you summarize what he?
Yeah, he was basically saying that they're, being careful, that they don't want to be the ones to start World War III, that they take that seriously, that the destruction of the global economy is something that involves the entire world because the oil, in the targets would shut
Mhm.
down the world economy essentially. But he was very, very clear that there is a response coming.
Yeah.
And I think that it's true. I think it's true that the Iranians are waiting to allow the ceasefire. They weren't going to drop their
Yeah.
attack right in the middle, even if it is a charade. They
Fake.
weren't going
Yeah.
to do it right in the middle of that. Um, but he was very clear that it's coming.
Mhm. Yeah, it's my sense too, but I
He just like cuts through it all. It's just he's a very interesting guest. And also just
sure.
he's interesting because you see him on the media, right? Like he's the guy who goes on the BBC and gets like berated on the BBC, and he's just always so good at.
Cool as a cucumber. Well, he's got a cool, like his role is cool, right? Like he's the professor at Iran. He's a professor at an Iranian university teaching Iranians how Westerners think. Like he's the professor of Occidentalism at like Occidental literature and stuff. At
Yeah, he's a crazy hardworking. Our interview with him started, he was in Beijing and it started after midnight, after midnight, and then we made him
yeah,
sit through the like most horrifying newscast. Nora just
yeah,
deserves so much credit for doing that every week. And everybody comes out of it like we're all basically in tears by the end of the newscast.
yeah. Yeah, he went to Venezuela as an electoral observer.
Yeah, I didn't know
He's just
that. He's
flying
like,
all
yeah,
over the
he's
place.
yeah, but even just like to do an interview starting at midnight and then
Yeah.
he's not like I have to wrap it up. We're just like it's like 10 after 1 in the morning and we're like we just have a couple more
You know what's
questions for
you know
you.
what's funny? I was invited by the Venezuelan government to be an electoral observer, and I was like, man, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I
but,
don't know,
but
some people it
Morandi
just seems like
flies
he's got
from
2 days.
her.
And when something actually happens and then he's actually like on like he'll
Yeah.
just do interviews all day. When we had him on last time with the Iran stuff, he was like, you know more than I do because I've been doing wall
Oh,
to wall interviews for
right.
the last
He
eight
doesn't get to
hours.
sit and read. Yeah, I remember.
He just sits on that couch and yeah,
Yeah.
but it's just it's yeah, it's great to have someone like that just sort of tell you how it is. And he's obviously like allied with the Iranian government and in a sense, but it's clear that he also has all the normal critiques that somebody would have of their government. And then just the way that he just reverses everything to be like
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, in Iran we don't have the democracy that you guys have in the United States, where someone's wife is the person after they're the
Yeah.
person for 2 terms and then the people that get unelected or get to run again. he just he just said it just so plainly that you're like this.
Yeah. Um, so you also showed the Imad complex, the Imad 4
The Ahmad
complex.
4 and then each of the truck launched missiles, they had like truck 16, truck 15. They're just like their psyops are just so good.
Yeah, I
uh
mean, I had this thought when I saw that one where I was like, the Taliban, they say the Taliban defeated the Americans by sending a series of WhatsApp messages in 2021. And it's like if Hezbollah defeats Israel by a bunch of YouTube videos, you know,
yeah,
they're gonna defeat Israel by showing a series of videos.
I mean that was both, right? It was an incredible psyop, but it's also like, holy, they have that. Like we've known
Yeah.
they have that. They
But you
had it
didn't
in
know it looked like
2006.
that, right?
Oh,
Like,
just the scale of it and to yeah, because I think a lot of the question we've watched these
yeah,
weapons be, brought across the land corridor all
yeah,
throughout the Syria war. That's what the airstrikes that the Israelis do in Syria all the time is trying to hit these
yeah,
like precision guided large missiles that have to be fired off of trucks. And they don't seem like something that in an all out war. I mean, the question always seemed like, where's Hezbollah going to fire these? And now we
now you
know
know.
because the just the scale of it is that once you have that kind of an exit, like that kind of a missile silo, you can put anything on it, right?
Yeah,
That's what like short of submarines, like that's what you need. You need to have protected missile silos and we're just seeing it. And just to do that story too, I went back and I was reading some stuff from 2006 just to see sort of like what
yeah.
people were
I
saying
guess
in
they had underground
2006.
launch sites in 2006, but they were
Yeah,
probably more like what they
absolutely.
have in Gaza now.
Exact. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Just the scale of everything. Like the New York Times in 2006 was like Hezbollah is thought to have 4,000 fighters. 4,000. And now they're
Wow.
like, now Nasrallah's like, easy. We have 100,000, but we have
Yeah.
more, but we can't take any more.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's just,
Houthi was talking about 400,000 now. He's talking about 400,000 that they've trained, 420,000. But I mean,
yeah. So in the 2006 war, Hezbollah's peak was 150 rockets in a day. They fired 150 rockets today,
mhm,
and it's like not a story on the BBC. It's not a story on
yeah.
Canadian news. It just, the scale has just been blown out of the water in such a way that there's just no way Israel's going to do it. If Israel does it, they'll be done in weeks. I don't know.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm rethinking that because like they're just now like Israel is bombing farther into Lebanon and Hezbollah is bombing farther into Israel now. Like it's just every week it's kind of normalized that 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 they strike deeper into each other's, and Israel's always been like we'll strike wherever we want. But Hezbollah's now going deeper and destroying buildings and destroy like burning,
And still
buildings.
not targeting civilians, still not hitting, like, the restraint on them comparatively is just, it's remarkable. And that's kind of what Morandi was saying, was essentially like, he was just being real about it. Like, this is a destructive, catastrophic thing that you don't
Mhm.
just throw your country into war. You don't do that. And it's like, we come from countries where that's exactly what we do. Like, there
Yeah,
was no plan in Afghanistan
right.
in September and October of 2001. There was no plan,
But
right? They
that's
just
also
started
because they know
hurling.
there's no consequence.
Yeah,
They know nothing will
yeah.
happen to them. You can go have a war in Afghanistan. It's not like Afghanistan's gonna hit you.
There's no way for Israel. There's no way for Israel to deal with those bunkers ever,
Yeah, because that's like
ever.
I remember you saying that on a sit rep where you were like, these are not tunnels dug into sand. These are you said it on the live
Yeah, it's
stream
stone.
on Wednesday. They're carved into rock.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you
and
can
and none of those go
bomb.
away. The World War II bunkers in Switzerland, they're still there. They don't go anywhere. And the process of dismantling them, it's not a real thing. To go
Yeah,
in down into the tunnel and fight, it's just not a real thing. And so Israel has this permanent condition on its border where they're relying on the like humanity and rationality
yeah,
of their enemies to not destroy their state.
yeah,
And I think that if you look at the trajectory, like, it's possible to see where the patience comes from, even though in this 11 months that we've been living through, it's admittedly difficult to watch this,
yeah.
you know, it just that Israel deserves it. So like
Yeah, but
like nothing we've seen in our lifetimes. It's just, it's
I don't think it's something we've seen ever. I don't think it's ever. I don't think there is a precedent for this. And I know what people are going to say, and I stand by it.
yeah.
Um,
The purposefulness, the Israeli military is admitting to
yeah,
bombing 75 schools
yeah,
since July 1st, in schools that are full of civilians. And the IDF is saying that. They're not just saying we targeted command centers. They're saying in schools. Like,
yeah,
it's like they want their population to know that
yeah,
they're hitting these schools, and that are just massacres, almost beyond the ability to cover them, right? Because there's
yeah,
not, in every school, there's not journalists in every school. There's not people with cell phone. We've seen this like beautiful stuff from Gaza where people build phone chargers out of wood and,
Yeah.
tomato paste cans. And that's true, but that's not in every school. There's 2 million people who don't have, cell phones. They're not charging their phones and reporting everything that's happening. The Al Jazeera journalists don't have the ability to go around to each of these schools because the schools that they're hitting are in
Yeah.
areas where that's the only place that civilians are.
Yeah.
You can't go from one spot to the next.
Yeah.
It's not like everyone is penned only into that 10%. It's like there's islands in these schools. And these schools were appalling in November, right? Like
Yeah.
the living conditions were appalling. Like what seems like a lifetime ago for people that are living there. It's just and they're yeah, the DNC's like chanting bring home the hostages. And I just don't think that there's anyone at this point that isn't aware of what's going on, right? Like the carnage is so far beyond.
Well, they're literally covering their ears. Nobody does that.
Yeah,
If
it's demented.
like if they didn't know, why cover your ears? You only cover your ears because you don't want to hear something you know.
Yeah. That whole circus in the States. I think this program is proud of how little we cover American
Yeah,
politics.
exactly.
But
Absolutely.
but that circus in Chicago is disgusting.
Yeah.
The chanting to bring home the hostages yeah, as if
And there
that
was
wasn't the thing that could happen on the first day. We talked about that. They would have handed over a, 180 of the 250 prisoners could have been home, and Israel would have taken the collective knowledge of all of those people on the
yeah,
first 72 hours,
yeah.
and they would have been able to piece together for all the other families what had happened instead of this like 8 months where they're just telling people now like, oh, we found
Well,
your
I
dead
mean,
family members
the
in the.
casualties could have been maybe double digits that day too, without the Hannibal Doctrine,
Yep.
right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a lot to know about October 7th, but for sure that morning raid,
yeah,
that's I think it's fair to say that's true of the morning raid. I'm less sure of what happens. I don't know how all those people got to Gaza. They didn't come from the Qassam brigades.
yeah,
People got to Gaza and were turned over to Qassam.
right,
But yeah, but that's all the more reason that Qassam would have handed them over. And now that we
yeah,
know who they are, right, from the November release, which was like
yeah,
what was it, 110 people? Those were all those people were
yeah,
like immediately could have been released. And Qassam said that the the only reason it wasn't more is because they literally couldn't find the other
yeah. They
ones
needed a
because
little
there's
bit of
never
time.
been a moment. All they needed was like, and even if you were an Israeli like cheerleader, it could have happened in a 4 hour pause.
Did they? Did you see a news item about them recovering some more corpses?
Yeah, they recovered 6 more corpses that they said had been killed by smoke from an operation from the like Khan Yunis invasion, the 6 month invasion from December to whatever it was, March or April. Or till Ramadan, right? They got chased out at the end of Ramadan. But yeah, they said they went back in and found those corpses. Is like the families of at least 3 of them just found out that day. And that's something that you could have known just by, yeah. I just remember the moment of realizing like they're not going to try to get their people back.
Yeah. No, they are not. And let's end with our Let's see what his rank is. Major General Yitzhak Brick. Major General Yitzhak Brick, I believe yesterday. Oh no, it's published today
Yeah.
in Haaretz. Let's put it on the screen, shall we?
Yeah, let's put it up because it's he 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 was a division commander, and then scroll to the bottom and see what his credentials were.
It's Major General.
Yeah,
Major General Yitzhak Brick served in the Armored Corps as a brigade, division, and troops commander,
yeah,
and was the commander of the IDF military colleges. For
yeah.
10 years, he was the Israel Defense Forces ombudsman. So, this is a very pessimistic article from Major General Yitzhak Brick. And he basically says, I mean, the key is it's 1 year. That's what he says. He says Israel will collapse within a year if the war of attrition against Hamas and Hezbollah continues. And why will it collapse within a year? Find the one key paragraph. He says terror attacks are intensifying in the West Bank and inside the country. The reservist army is voting with its feet following recurring mobilizations of combat soldiers, and the economy is crashing. Israel has become a pariah state, prompting economic boycotts and an embargo on arms shipments. We are also losing our social resilience as the growing hatred between different parts of the nation threatens to ignite and bring to its destruction from
Yeah,
within.
they all hate each other, right? They
Yeah.
hate each other. They hate the prisoners who got out. They're
Yeah.
the people who the prisoner who got released. If they didn't say that they were tortured, if they then they basically had to shut down their social media because they were getting from Israelis inside Israel hate for being in the wrong place at the wrong time on October 7th.
And they hate each other at all levels. Like Gallant and Netanyahu hate each
Yeah, they
other.
can't be in the same room.
Yeah. Gantz and uh, whatever, those two settler guys hate each other. Yeah. And then on the street, they're fighting. The hostage families are getting beaten up. The Orthodox are getting
The
beaten up.
Orthodox, yeah.
So, yeah. Israel has entered an existential tailspin and could soon reach a point of no return. And he says only replacing Netanyahu and his cronies as soon as possible can save the country. If that's true, there's no saving the country because Netanyahu is not going anywhere.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
Well, once the prisoners are all dead, and once you're just bringing back corpses and calling that a success, like the IDF framed that as a success. They were like, previous times that we've gone in to get dead bodies, it's taken 2 or 3 days to get the bodies. This time, it only took hours to get the dead bodies. Like that's what they're saying in their official communications. Like that is it, and they don't, it's not like they're not like Castro giving 8-hour speeches or whatever. Like the IDF
Right.
releases, at most a few hundred words a day.
Right.
And in those few hundred words, they're bragging about the speed at which they recovered dead bodies from a tunnel that they killed. And it's a tunnel, again, the tunnel is 10 meters deep. There's still never recovering anything under in the layer that we know exists from the prisoners themselves that
Mhm.
know how deep it was. Anything that you're seeing when they're blowing up tunnels that are below, that are about like less than 30 meters deep, when you're 10 meters deep, that's like basically
It's
a
nothing.
basement.
Yeah.
It's not the spider web of tunnels that have made it possible for the Palestinians to fight this long. So they're choosing in their few hundred words a day to be like, yeah, we bombed so many schools. We, and they say their soldiers were killed. Like their soldiers were killed today. We get everybody saying like, do these Yassines work? Like, does look that was an
Mm.
interception or whatever. And today, there's no operation that matches in the field reports the Israelis claiming a soldier in the 401st Armored Division in Rafah was killed by an anti-tank missile.
Oh,
Like they're killed by Yassins. That's how they're dying. Yeah.
so I mean,
Yeah,
he
50
didn't really.
airstrikes a day still. There's
How many?
50 airstrikes a day, 50 a day. They claim that they tell us every day how many there are.
Mhm.
They're still killing 50 to 80
Uh,
people. It just feels gross to even talk about this, like to say it's either two people or three people. Like the margin of error is just, it's appalling. But that's, and there's no the failure, the collapse. There's no collapse of the government. It's still the
Yeah,
Hamas
yeah,
government that's giving us these numbers. It's still civil defense. It's still the government media office. The hospitals, they fix the
yeah,
hospitals the second the Israelis leave, one room at a time.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess
Well,
we this is the first time that I've seen an estimate of how long. I don't know if it's rhetoric. I don't know if he's being alarmist. This is the first time I've seen anyone actually say this is how long we think Israel can go on.
yeah. And he's
And
only says everything that we've been saying since
right, but he's
November,
bolder
December.
than me. He's much bolder than me because he put a timeline on it.
Yeah,
Because
me too.
that's always been this question, like how long can they keep this up? They can't keep this up forever. Just trying to do the math on the armored vehicles, trying to
Yeah,
figure out, right?
yeah.
But he doesn't seem to think it's armored vehicles. He seems to think it's the economy and the reservists and being unable to recruit and maybe civil war.
Well, when you're talking about those things, where does armored vehicles fit in your article? If you're only writing 1,000 words and you're talking about
Yeah,
civil war, global pariah,
right.
like,
Right.
so what did you make of the Qassam operation by the recruits? Because that was interesting that they mentioned that it was recruits, right? They could have made that same video and without the recruits part, but they
Yeah.
let, I mean, the guy that they get the film, the editors get the film,
Yeah.
and obviously that fighter was like, he really wanted to say that, right? I mean, you would, as you would, if you joined the Qassam
Yeah.
brigades during the genocide and carried out an operation like that, you would.
Including and that operation in particular.
In particular, that operation in Netzarim corridor, that is the kind of operation that could, if the
It's gonna
Israelis are
drive them.
planning to go on for years,
Yeah.
those are the kind of operations that are going to take place. I just thought, yeah, but I was curious what your thoughts were on Kassam saying that.
Yeah,
You know,
I think they want to tell people that what you've been saying, that they're able to replenish their battalions. They're able to replenish their units and they're growing. They're not they're not being attrited away. They're growing
yeah,
in under these conditions of war, which is again classic of guerrilla warfare. Like Che Guevara says that like the best way to develop a guerrilla force is the only way to train a guerrilla force is actually fighting. You can't really train a guerrilla force in peacetime. It doesn't you don't have, and so the
yeah,
training is during the war. So
yeah. And so they were obviously there in the background when those,
yeah,
because they showed in the video them wiring up those IEDs. Those are Qassam IEDs. And
yeah,
so they had seen those in a way that you could train for a decade and not have the skills that the Tel El Hawa battalion has gotten just from fighting.
exactly.
And it's interesting that their recruits would go to the Tel El Hawa battalion. It's not the Jabalia battalion moving into Tel El Hawa's
Right. Keep
neighborhood,
making
right?
that point. Yep.
I just find that to be remarkable because that's just such a telling point. And the fighters themselves are always, they're they're putting those clues in
Yes.
all the time. They're saying like they like write on a piece of paper and stick it beside the rockets and like, this is the, you know,
Mhm.
Western battalion of the Rafa Brigade.
Yeah.
This is the specific fighting formation that's taking
And
this operation.
The Palestinian reality is of these communities being cut off from each other. And
Totally.
so these videos are just one way that they can communicate with one another, and they can
Yeah.
shout each other out and
Yeah.
brag, show off.
Yeah, it's like that's the thing that we don't know, that just that raised so many questions. Like we don't know the level of overall command and control
Mhm.
from moment to moment. We know it localized.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's remarkable to there. It's just I'm interested to see if we'll see more of that. Because you could
Well,
also make the other point, right? That like it's kind of curious that Qassam did say these are the new recruits, because in a way, I think that's the most obvious thing, is that they'll have new recruits. But to do it, and to do it with that kind of an operation, it's just, yeah. And the tunnels, like they bragged that they found 150 tunnels at the Roth at the on the Philadelphia corridor.
mhm.
There's way more than
Yeah, well,
150 tunnels on the Egyptian border.
yeah. And again, so what? They'll dig more. What are they gonna? You can
Yeah.
always dig more.
Yeah, and they'll recycle, right? So
Yeah,
the idea that you need to cut off the Philadelphia corridor to prevent Palestinians from rearming themselves is a fundamental misunderstanding of what, like we've seen. It's cool, like we see, that HJ-8 anti-tank guided missile, and we make a big deal of it. But the reality is, we don't see all that much imported weaponry. We're
that's
definitely
right.
not seeing all of this decisive weaponry that's tilting the battle in some way, that Israel's like shaking their fist at all this foreign
Yeah,
material. And you could argue that the foreign material isn't even from the last decade,
right.
because those weapon systems are old.
Yeah.
They're from the 80s. And there was times like,
It was
in
that
Egypt,
Libya. Yeah,
yeah, when Libya was over, the overthrow in Libya matched with the chaos in Egypt,
yeah.
those systems moved at a way that they just didn't at any other
Since.
time.
Yeah,
And yeah, so and all of the unexploded ordnance is so much more than they need.
yeah,
And every, some people ask this, but like every single weapon that we see is using that explosive material. It's not like it
yeah.
doesn't work for the Shawad or it doesn't work for the
Right.
Yasin. It felt the whole nature of the way they've built their like indigenous weapons industry is that that's the material that goes inside all of the weapons that they have perfected. They have all of the building specs for that. They don't
Your
they don't
your goods, your goods are being returned to you. Um, yeah, so I guess this is gonna go on for a year, John. Don't make too many plans for the next year.
Well, I think that's what that is, right? I still think that we, although we've been better lately, I did think that there was going to be ceasefire. I thought there would be. I thought these ceasefire games would start sooner than this, and that there would be. I thought there would be pauses.
I can't get my brain around a ceasefire anymore. I don't even know. It's much easier for me to imagine the Israel not existing anymore than it is for me to imagine
Yeah.
Israel
Well, I
agreeing
remember
to a
saying that to you,
ceasefire.
that there was going to be elections, right? Like I was like, there's going
Yeah,
to be elections before there's a prisoner exchange,
yeah,
like a wholesale like ceasefire agreement. There'll be elections before that, and now it does look like this latest round of the ceasefire is
it's
so
not even farce. Like it's
no,
not tragedy and then farce. Like
no,
what's after farce? It's like yeah, it's like a
nobody would
cartoon of a
accept it.
farce.
Abbas wouldn't accept
Yeah.
this, right? They're not going to accept.
Well, it's like we want a ceasefire that's literally not a ceasefire. It's it's like they're just trying to change the definitions of words. Uh, Yeah.
Yeah, and they're farther away than ever from releasing thousands of Palestinian prisoners in
That's right.
Israeli
That's
society.
right.
They're demonstrating to protect
Yeah. It's
people who, you know,
yeah, the
raped and
only
almost murdered. Well, they've murdered many.
yeah.
They've like 60 people have been
Yeah.
killed in those torture.
The only consensus in Israeli society is abusing these prisoners,
Yeah.
capturing and abusing these prisoners. So yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I mean,
But they
with
don't
Lebanon,
capture anyone on the battlefield. They're not captured. They
yeah,
haven't captured fighters on the battlefield.
that's also remarkable, isn't it?
It's totally in this tiny area, even the smaller factions, they're not capturing people on the battlefield. They're still not overrunning positions that would
No,
indicate even modest success.
no.
We don't ever see weapons cache that's a legitimate cache.
Yeah,
We
they're just
see
fiction.
more weapons fired in a day on video than we see ever captured in
Yeah,
one place by the Israelis. They don't find their own people in this area where they
yeah,
have civilians penned into 11% of the territory, and they can't, they're not achieve, and they're not even really. I think that's what Gallant is saying, right? Like when he's saying we're moving north, there's not, at some point there's not anything left to smash
yeah. But
unless you're
that
going to
doesn't mean
actually go in and fight. You can't just sit on the edge and smash it. You have to at some point go in and fight, and they're not interested in that part of it. And that's why the airstrikes don't match with the battlefields. The airstrikes are across Gaza in places that there's not fighting in. It falls from the sky like a lightning bolt and kills people. It's not like they hear it approaching. They're
yeah.
just striking from the north to the south.
Well, Ralph Nader had a tweet today where he was talking about. He said the Israeli genocide in Gaza reportedly has its specialized teams that take destructive turns. One team specializes in destroying United Nation relief and health buildings, another in blowing up school shelters where sick and dying families are huddling, another team on wholesale removal of hundreds of thousands of refugees, having gone to whatever Netanyahu called safe areas, into new unknown areas exposed to whatever the F-16s choose to destroy. Another team specializes in hunting down Palestinian journalists and their families. That sounds like what's happening. So it could very well be.
There's no war call when people say, well, they'll study this war and war colleges for decades to come. There's no war college that's going to study what Israel is doing right now with any military
Yeah.
purpose. There's no military purpose to this destruction.
So I thought we were going to end with Yitzhak Brick, but there is one last thing. I don't know. We did mention it, but it seems like the Hezbollah war could just kind of keep going like this, where they're just eventually bombing each other, where Hezbollah is bombing all the way down the length of Israel and vice versa. And
Yeah. Well,
instead
that's
of
what
in
the bunkers prevent. The bunkers prevent Israel from waging a strictly aerial campaign. And the distance now between where Israeli forces are and where they would have to get to
Mhm.
invade on the ground is now so far that they're
Yeah,
walking through, they'll have to drive through this,
and it's getting longer.
and it's getting longer every day.
It's getting longer, and yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they'll just keep. Maybe it'll just be exchanges of missiles that just keep ticking up.
But that's specifically what Nasrallah said was not going to happen, right? Like he said you're gonna know.
But he's dependent. I still think the way that Hezbollah looks to me, I know they can invade Galilee and I know that they have the troops for it and I know that, but like it seems to me that they are designed to repel an Israeli invasion, not invade occupied Palestine.
Hmm.
So I imagine most of their battle plans are defensive in nature.
Oh, for sure they are,
Yeah.
for sure. But there's a for sure an offensive component. And you got to imagine how many of those Hezbollah fighters are like, I want to
What are we
go.
waiting for?
I want to go.
Now there's 400,000 Yemeni that are wanting to go too. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if turning this into a forever war is really going to suit Israel's interests. I don't think that Itzhak Brick is too far off when he says they can't last a year.
Yeah, not a year like this, that's for sure. Not a year like this. They
Oh,
they
this year is going to be worse. There's no reason to think this next year is going to be better. The next year is going to be worse than this year.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah, I
good
mean, but just the
that's a
actual
good note
like
to end on.
yeah, the number of troops that they sent, in the middle of the battle, the number of airstrikes is in relative to the peak of the fighting. Yeah. I mean, the peak of the fighting may have been in May.
When
There was
they've invaded Rafah.
yeah, and they were also in Jabalia at that time and yeah.
Yeah.
The beginning
Yeah.
of the Rafah brigade was really ready for the fight. There's in terms of like video production
Yeah.
operations, the early Rafah operations were in terms of um, quantity of
Yeah, and their
operations.
specialized booby trapping and their
Yeah, and
long-term.
their tunnels,
Yeah.
like the number of tunnel operations. Yeah,
All right, let's call it. All right, everybody, hang in there. Like and subscribe. I don't know. I mean, one of these days something huge is going to happen and then we're going to be back, but these are the days of grinding, I think. These are the grinding um just attrition. This is the war of attrition again. And Yitzhak Brick thinks it could go a year, so
yeah. And I mean, he's teaching at the War College, right? Like, it's not like that guy's just some reservist.
yeah. And I'm sure he has contacts galore in Gaza. So he's also probably got his ear to the ground in a way that
Yeah,
your average Twitter pro-Israel commentator might not. Your average pro-Israel Twitter commentator who says, if you don't like it, you shouldn't have started the war then.
you could, yeah, you can, you can surrender at any point.
You can surrender at any point and give back the hostages then.
Yeah. You know who the least wanting to surrender are? The children of Gaza are
Yeah,
the furthest from surrendering of any demographic in all of Gaza. And so it's not even close, right? Like
yeah,
everything is, when you talk about the difference between Hezbollah in 2006 compared to 20 years later, like what's Gaza's
yeah,
capacity for resistance to Israel over the next 20 years? It's very high.
yeah.
The kids, shout out to the kids. The kids have been
The
just
the first victims and
the
the
first
first
victims, but
targets.
even if you just look at the videos of like the water lineups, like it's kids. The kids
Yeah,
are pulling their weight and their families in just such a remarkable way. Total just little heroes. You know, they don't have the understanding of the arguments and the debates. They're just going out and getting water, spending their day. They're the ones who, when water comes down the road, they're the ones who run down the alleys and tell people the water's here, and that is just something that is never going to go away. Those kids are, it's not like when those kids are 16, that memory, it's just that's they're just built this way now.
yeah.
So 1 year, yeah,
All right, man.
hang in there, bro.
We'll see you guys in the next one.